Hi, so this deck of cards is the second in the series. It's volume 2 for responding to the world stress. And it was compiled to facilitate working through any passages that might deal with the topic stress or any standalone questions. All right, so let's get to it. The H-S is involved in releasing hormones and stimulating the pituitary gland. So what chemical species is involved in releasing hormones and stimulating the pituitary gland? That would be the hypothalamus. All right, and at this point, it would be good for you to familiarize yourself with what it looks like. So just Google image hypothalamus. And for the MCAT, you don't need to know like an in-depth detail of its anatomy. You should be familiar with the structure. The A functions in emotional regulation and motivation. So what structure functions in emotional regulation and motivation? That would be the amygdala. Okay, and as with the hypothalamus, Google image the structure just so you can get familiar with where it's located in the brain. Although I have another deck of cards that I released that do show its location. I think in volume 1 of this series. The H-S is the part of the brain associated with memory. So what structure in the brain is associated with memory? The hippocampus. So the hippocampus is a structure associated with memory. And again, as I said before, Google image it so you can see its location within the central aspect of the brain. P-N is associated with the stimulation of milk production. I know this doesn't seem like it's associated with stress, but just stick with me and go through all the cards and then you'll see how the big picture fits together, okay? So prolactin is the chemical that stimulates milk production, okay? T-N is associated with T cell growth and development. So what chemical is associated with T cell growth and development? And T cells are lymphocytes of the immune system, more commonly known as white blood cells. In biology cards, I'll discuss what this is more in depth, but I don't want to get too preachy and too long-winded. So yeah, we'll just leave that for another deck of cards. Thymosin. That would be thymosin. It's the chemical involved in the growth and development of T lymphocytes. And this might seem off topic as it relates to stress, but it's definitely intimately correlated. So just stick with it and you'll see how it fits later on. S-N is involved in the inhibition of growth hormone, insulin, and glucagon. S-N is involved in the inhibition of growth hormone, insulin, and glucagon. So what substance, chemical species is involved in the inhibition of growth hormone, insulin, and glucagon? Somatostatin, okay? Somatostatin. G-S are associated with stress. G-S are associated with stress. So these are some type of chemical that are associated with stress, or molecule, I should say. That would be glucocorticoids, and they're a type of steroid compound. C blank T, V blank Y, a psychometric property, is the extent to which an assessment measures the entire construct fully. And when I say construct fully, I mean whatever's being tested. When you see words like psychometric property, you're starting to get into research. And so a psychometric property would be like something measurable, would be like measuring, let's see, depression. So let's say you have some type of clinical test to measure depression. So the whatever you're using would be the metric that's measuring this psychological impingement, okay? And that would be content validity, all right? And the people who validate content would be like professionals, like psychiatrists, biochemists. They would review, let's say it's like a questionnaire that you're using to measure depression. They would review the questions to make sure that it properly tests and fairly questions the patient about this disease, this psychological, I don't want to say disease, but this impairment, okay? P blank E, V blank Y, also a psychometric property, is the extent to which an assessment is able to predict something. Okay? So what is this? This would be predictive validity. And although predictive validity is a psychometric property, okay, you could also use the example of depression. Let's say someone goes through a traumatic experience, like losing a loved one or breaking up with someone. And then they're also issued the same questionnaire example that I posed previously. How well would this questionnaire be at predicting whether or not the person will develop depression in a month or a year from now? Or another good one is like a pregnancy test, although that's outside of the domain of psychiatry. Like if a woman takes a pregnancy test, how good is that thing at predicting whether she'll actually be pregnant? All things being equal, no miscarriage, stuff like that. In Lazarus and Folksman cognitive appraisal model, blank appraisal is asking questions regarding the risk or demand associated with stressor. So at what stage do we ask questions about the risk or demand associated with a stressor? If you don't know what a stressor is, watch volume 1 of this series. That would be primary appraisal. And Lazarus and Folkman, they're just some really smart guys who came up with this construct for the steps through which we go in assessing our stress. So those are the guys that were named previously on the front side of this card. In Lazarus and Folksman cognitive appraisal model, blank appraisal evaluates possible outcomes, feelings, and perceptions associated with the stressor. It usually involves an assessment of one's ability to successfully cope with the stressor. And cope was also discussed in the previous volume to this series, and it's basically just how well we deal with something difficult. So that would be secondary appraisal. Secondary appraisal. A blank stressors are hard to control and often happen in the background of life. So A blank stressors are hard to control and happen in the background of life. Okay? So that would be ambient stressors. And I know in my life I can name many. Like I live near a major roadway, so there's always noise coming from the vehicles driving by or the construction going on. Also, like when you're cleaning the house and if you spray some Windex or bleach or some cleaning agent, the molecules will disperse. Those are also ambient stressors to your body. It could be anything. It could be noise coming from the electronics plugged in, or even electronics itself. Electricity can be an ambient stressor because moving charge creates a magnetic field and you are exposed to that. So, things like that. Moving to an unfamiliar city and the death of a loved one would be a significant L blank C blank E. So what would these be considered? What are they examples of? They're examples of a life change, okay? So a life change. A blank T stressors are G blank L stressors, not individual, meaning that they can influence more than one person. So it might be hard for you to fill in these blanks. If you know, great, and if you don't, that's great too. You're about to learn. So ambient stressors are global stressors, and global stressors can, affect many people at one time. A good example of this would be like pollution coming from the factories in your nearby, across the street or down the road from you. The exhaust from cars driving down the street. Perceived disrespect from a peer would be a D blank H blank E. So what would perceived disrespect from a peer be categorized as? That would be a daily hassle. A daily hassle. T blank now assumes that stressors can elicit very different patterns of response or stereotype physiological patterns of response. Okay, when I say very different patterns of response, I mean relative to being like males and females, okay? So this is a female symbol and here goes men. So different physiological patterns of response. And so what is this G thing? That would be GAS, General Adaptation Syndrome. Okay, so in men, if there's a perceived danger, they might go into sympathetic nervous system mode or fight or flight mode and be ready to fight, or the adrenaline might start pumping. Whereas females, if the stressor is non-life threatening, they might use their heads a little bit and go into tend or befriend mode, where they might try to make friends with an enemy, like a neighbor who's making too much noise, so that things can work out for their overall benefit and reduce stress levels.